It started like any other night, until it didn't. The old neon sign outside Rosie's flickered against the rain-slicked pavement, casting a faint red glow on a man who had once commanded the entire tech world with just a glance. Dwayne Johnson, 53, CEO of Johnson Innovations, didn't belong in a place like this. His world was built on billion-dollar ideas, military-grade patents, and boardrooms filled with tension and tailored suits. But tonight, the boardroom had broken him. A 200-page merger contract, dense, impenetrable, and threatening to collapse a $2 billion deal, lay open like a battlefield he couldn't conquer. He didn't come to Rosie's for the food. He wasn't there for the coffee or the jukebox humming forgotten Motown tunes. He came to escape the pressure, just for a moment. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that didn't reek of desperation and ambition. But even here, in this old-school diner where truckers nursed late-night pancakes and nurses gulped down black coffee, the deal followed him. The contract spread out on the table in front of him like a storm cloud, clauses and contingencies drowning his once razor-sharp focus. His Ivy League legal team had failed. His tech geniuses couldn't crack it, and Dwayne, stoic, battle-tested Dwayne, was running out of time. That's when she appeared. Grace Harper, 28, apron tied loosely around her waist, hair in a messy bun, green eyes sharp and curious. She'd worked at Rosie's for 3 years. Most people saw her as just a waitress. But she saw things. Patterns, body language, stress. She could read a person faster than they could order a cheeseburger. And tonight, the man in the corner booth, he wasn't just tired. He was unraveling. She slid a glass of water onto his table. "Rough night?" she asked, voice gentle but grounded. Dwayne didn't look up. "You could say that." She glanced at the paper battlefield in front of him, covered in angry red ink. "Looks like you're fighting a war with a dictionary." Dwayne snorted, finally looked at her. "You a lawyer now, sweetheart? Stick to pouring coffee." That should have been the end of it. Another powerful man, another dismissive line. But Grace didn't flinch. Her smile didn't break. Her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with quiet defiance. "Try me," she said simply. And that was it. The moment everything changed. Dwayne, irritated but intrigued, shoved the contract toward her like a test he knew she'd fail. "If you're so smart, then translate it." He expected a flustered smile, an apology. Instead, she sat down, picked up the papers, and started reading like she meant it. This wasn't just a waitress with opinions. This was something else. Something dangerous. And if you think this is just another story about a tech merger, think again. This is about underestimating the wrong person. It's about brilliance that doesn't wear a suit. It's about what happens when quiet genius finally speaks, and someone powerful is smart enough to listen. Dwayne Johnson was a man who didn't just play the game, he'd helped design the rules. At 53, he stood at the helm of Johnson Innovations, a tech empire that had reshaped how the world communicated, shared, and secured information. From military-grade encryption protocols to sleek consumer tech used by millions, his company's fingerprints were on everything digital. Known for his silent intensity, he was the kind of CEO who rarely raised his voice. But when he did, entire departments scrambled. He wasn't charming, and he didn't try to be. Results were his language, control was his religion. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, control was slipping through his fingers. The merger with Synergy Solutions had been hailed as the industry's next tectonic shift, a bold $2 billion move that would unify two titans of tech. But buried inside the 200-page contract were landmines, and not even his Harvard-trained legal team could clear them fast enough. The language was a labyrinth of indemnification clauses, fiduciary liabilities, and escrow stipulations that twisted, even the sharpest minds into knots. Investors were getting anxious. Competitors were circling like sharks sensing blood. Time was running out. And Dwayne, usually calm in chaos, found himself on the edge. His driver had suggested taking a break. "Clear your head. There's an old diner a few blocks down. Rosie's. Nobody will bother you there." Dwayne nearly scoffed. He hadn't stepped foot in a place like that in years, but the silence of his glass-walled office had started to feel like a pressure cooker. He relented. Rosie's was nothing like the places Dwayne frequented. The chipped linoleum floor, the cracked faux leather booths, the smell of burnt coffee and grilled onions. It was all a far cry from the brushed chrome and glass of his world. But maybe that was the point. The diner was a time capsule. Its jukebox softly hummed a forgotten Motown tune. A few tired patrons, truckers, nurses, a young couple, filled the booths. No one gave the man in the $5,000 suit a second look. Dwayne took a booth in the back, dragging the contract across the table like a wounded soldier. His pen slashed through paragraphs in frustration, scribbling notes and question marks in the margins. The words blurred, definitions melted. He could demolish a room full of engineers with a single question, yet here he was, stuck. There were parts of the contract that didn't just confuse him, they infuriated him. Terms like contingent liabilities and equity release triggers felt like puzzles designed to humiliate even the brilliant. The legalese was a fortress, and he was locked outside. From behind the counter, Grace Harper watched. She'd seen all types pass through Rosie's, cops on edge, truckers down to their last check, couples pretending to still be in love. But something about this man was different. It wasn't the suit or the aura of wealth. It was the way he gripped his pen, the silent war in his posture. The kind of tension that said this wasn't just a rough night, this was a breaking point. Grace didn't approach right away. She'd learned to wait, to read the moment. But when she saw the way he slammed his pen down and rubbed the bridge of his nose, she grabbed a glass of water and made her move. Sneakers squeaking on the floor, she walked over, calm, casual, but curious. She saw the paper storm on his table, the barely contained rage behind his eyes. And when she asked if it had been a rough night, she wasn't just making small talk. Grace didn't blink when Dwayne dismissed her. "You a lawyer now, sweetheart? Stick to pouring coffee," he said, without even a flicker of remorse. It was meant to be a put-down, sharp and final, the kind of line he'd used 1,000 times to end conversations with people he considered distractions. But Grace had faced far worse than snide remarks. Her smile stayed put, gentle, unshaken, but her eyes, they sharpened, narrowing just enough to show she wasn't walking away. She'd seen this kind of arrogance before. She'd served it coffee, she'd watched it fold under pressure, and tonight she decided not to step back. "I'm just trying to help," she replied calmly, her voice as even as her gaze. "You look like you're wrestling a bear." Dwayne's pen stopped mid-sentence. He looked up, annoyed and slightly amused. "It's a contract," he snapped. "Unless you've got a law degree tucked under that apron, I don't think you'd—" "Get it?" Grace tilted her head unfazed. "Try me," she said. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for the jukebox to shift songs and for a nearby trucker to cough into his coffee. Dwayne stared at her, weighing whether to end this right there or lean into the absurdity of it all. Then he laughed. Not a warm laugh, but cold and edged with condescension. "Oh, you're a genius now. Fine. If you're so smart, then translate it." He shoved the papers across the table. The thick contract slid toward her like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. He expected her to flinch, to step back, to realize she'd overstepped. Instead, Grace pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, and picked up the first page. Her fingers moved with a kind of quiet confidence, brushing across the heavy legal text like she'd handled documents like this before. She wasn't pretending, she was processing. Dwayne leaned back in the booth, arms crossed. He was half irritated, half entertained. Let her try. She'd stumble, say something cute, hand it back. Maybe she'd even apologize. But Grace didn't blink. Her eyes scanned the page, her lips moving slightly as she read, piecing together, meaning with a focus that made Dwayne shift in his seat. Then she reached into her apron, pulled out a small notepad, and started jotting notes. Her handwriting small, precise, deliberate. A few minutes passed. Grace flipped to another section of the contract. Then finally she spoke. "Okay," she said, her voice calm but confident. "This part, indemnification protocols. It basically decides who's responsible if things go south. Like, imagine you buy a car and it breaks down the next day. This section says whether you pay for the repairs or the seller does. In this deal, Synergy's pushing for you to take most of the risk if their tech fails after the merger." Dwayne blinked. The explanation was dead on. His voice dropped. "That's actually not wrong." There was no smugness in her tone, no sarcasm, just quiet clarity. Grace flipped another page. "This escrow clause, it's like a piggy bank neither party can touch unless certain conditions are met. They're asking you to put $500 million into it, which is huge. It'll freeze your cash flow. You could counter it. Maybe negotiate staggered releases as milestones are met." Dwayne leaned forward now, the sarcasm draining from his posture. The arrogance softened, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "How do you know this?" Grace smiled, almost mischievous. "I listen. I read. People underestimate waitresses, but we hear everything. Business deals, breakups, bad bets, and I've always had a thing for puzzles." Dwayne didn't say a word, but for the first time that night, he wasn't in control of the room. Dwayne watched her like she was a glitch in his carefully constructed system, something that wasn't supposed to happen, but somehow did. The confidence in her tone, the clarity of her logic, the calm precision with which she dissected the contract, it all left him more unsettled than impressed. He had built an empire by hiring top-tier minds, surrounding himself with credentials, accolades, pedigrees, and yet here was a waitress, no degree in sight, who just unraveled the single most complex document his legal team had been wrestling with for weeks. And she did it over a diner table with a notepad and a pencil. "Who are you?" he asked, half curious, half cautious. Grace looked up, setting the papers down slowly. There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but not fear, more like calculation. Then she exhaled softly. "Just someone who's good at figuring things out," she said. "You done mocking me yet?" Dwayne didn't reply, but the silence between them said everything. The tension had shifted. The balance of power had tilted. As the diner thinned out and the clock ticked toward midnight, Grace wiped her hands on her apron and returned to the counter, letting him process what had just happened. But Dwayne wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He pushed the contract aside and turned his full attention to her. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" he asked. Grace moved methodically, cleaning up as she replied, "I'm a lot of things. A waitress, yeah, a sister, a daughter." She paused, then added, "I was a computer science major for a while." That made him sit up straighter. "Computer science," he repeated. "Why'd you quit?" "I didn't," she said simply. "I had to pause. My mum got sick. My little brother was struggling. Somebody had to pay the bills. So I stepped up." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it that even Dwayne couldn't ignore. "And since then?" he asked, leaning forward. Grace wiped down the counter, her movements measured. "Since then, I've been teaching myself. Coding, mostly. It keeps my brain busy." Dwayne stared at her for a moment, the gears in his mind turning. There was something about the way she said it, quiet, unassuming but deeply rooted in conviction, that made it impossible to doubt her. "Coding. Like what?" he asked. She hesitated for a split second, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I've been working on something," she said softly. "An app. There was almost a laugh in her voice, but it wasn't from humor. It was the tired chuckle of someone used to not being taken seriously. I mean, who's going to invest in a waitress? I don't have a degree or a resume that impresses anyone. Just code I write at 2 a.m. after my shifts. Dwayne's mind raced. His company, Johnson Innovations, had been bleeding market share to competitors with more agile, communication-focused platforms. His own R&D team had hit a wall, too structured, too cautious, and yet here was someone who, in the quiet hours between cleaning tables and filling coffee cups, had created something real, something he could feel in his gut was different, and the most stunning part? He'd nearly missed her. Not because she wasn't brilliant, but because he hadn't bothered to look. He studied her now, like seeing her for the first time. The waitress, the coder, the mystery. And for the first time that night, Dwayne Johnson wasn't thinking about the contract. He was thinking about her code, her mind, her story. Dwayne leaned back, his eyes fixed on her, but this time not with skepticism or superiority. This time, with something bordering on respect. He wasn't a man easily impressed. Yet this woman, in her sneakers and apron, had just sliced through a multi-million-dollar contract and casually revealed she was building an app during graveyard shifts. It didn't add up, and that's exactly why it intrigued him. He'd built his empire by spotting talent others missed, and now he was realizing he'd almost walked past one of the brightest minds he'd ever encountered just because she poured his water and not his whiskey. "You're wrong," he said, his voice lower, more sincere. "Someone would take you seriously." Grace raised an eyebrow, arms crossed over her apron. "You mean someone besides the guy who just called me sweetheart and told me to stick to coffee?" He winced a little, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fair point. I was an ass," he admitted. "But I'm not stupid." There was an odd silence between them, broken only by the faint hum of the jukebox in the background. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't awkward. It was something else. Mutual recalibration. He was reassessing her, and she was reevaluating what to do with a man who'd just flipped from arrogant executive to whatever this was now. "You've got something special, Grace," Dwayne continued. "That app you're working on, let me help you build it. I can give you resources, funding, a team, you name it." She studied him for a long second. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it became unreadable. "Why should I trust you?" she asked flatly. "You don't even know me." "Because I know talent when I see it," Dwayne said without hesitation, "and because you just saved my deal. Let me return the favor." Grace didn't respond right away. She looked down, tapping her fingers lightly on the counter. She wasn't dazzled by the offer. He could tell that more than anything made him want to double down. This wasn't someone desperate for a break. This was someone who had learned to survive without one. After a beat, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "but I have conditions." Now it was Dwayne's turn to raise an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I keep my job here at Rosie's until the app is live," she said. "No NDAs that trap me. I get to lead development. I decide what this app becomes." He opened his mouth to push back. She didn't let him. "And if you're just looking to slap your name on it and control everything, then forget it." Dwayne exhaled slowly, then nodded. "All right. You got a deal, on your terms." It was the first time in years he'd let someone else dictate the rules. But somehow it didn't feel like a concession. It felt like evolution. As they shook hands across the counter, Dwayne felt something shift, not just in the dynamic between them, but inside himself. He hadn't just found a potential product. He'd found perspective. And in that humble little diner, with grease-stained menus and flickering lights, a partnership began. One built not on power or position, but on mutual recognition. He didn't know yet how far they'd go. He just knew this. Grace Harper wasn't going to be underestimated again. Not by him. Not by anyone. Dwayne couldn't stop thinking about her. All week as he finalized the synergy deal, her voice kept echoing in his mind. The merger, once a tangled web of liabilities and legal minefields, now looked manageable, even smart. And it was all thanks to Grace. Her insights had exposed hidden traps, helped him renegotiate key clauses, and ultimately saved Johnson Innovations millions. His legal team couldn't believe how the contract had turned around. But Dwayne knew better. It wasn't them. It was her. Still, it wasn't just about the contract anymore. Her app, the way she broke down complexities, the sheer clarity with which she solved problems. He couldn't shake it. She had something most of his polished. Execs didn't. Instinct, creativity, and the kind of raw talent that doesn't fit neatly on a resume. So a few days after the deal closed, he returned to Rosie's, not with documents this time, but with something else. A proposal. A real one. He waited until her shift slowed. She spotted him before he said a word, drying her hands on a towel and raising an eyebrow like, "You again?" But she came over. And this time, Dwayne didn't waste a second. "I want to help you build it," he said, placing a folder on the table. Inside was the outline of a partnership, funding, support, her as lead developer, full creative control, no gimmicks, no catch, just belief. Grace skimmed through it, eyes narrowing with each page. She didn't look overwhelmed. She looked calculating, like she was checking his sincerity line by line. Then she closed it and looked at him. "I told you, I keep my job here until it's live," she said. "I remember," Dwayne nodded. "Nothing changes. And I want real input. This isn't a vanity project. I want it built right. Then we build it your way." Her jaw tightened. He knew this wasn't just about an app. It was about trust, about someone like her not being reduced to a checkbox in someone else's success story. Slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said. "We try." And try they did. In the following months, Rosie's became their unofficial war room. Between coffee refills and closing time, Grace brought him into her world, a world of midnight coding marathons, napkin sketch diagrams, and learning to make do with what you had. Dwayne, who had lived in a bubble of endless resources, started to see what innovation looked like without a cushion. He watched her navigate complex architecture with nothing but grit and curiosity. He saw how she tested, failed, refined, and kept going. She wasn't afraid to be wrong. She was afraid of doing it safe. She introduced him to her family too, her mother recovering but still fragile, her brother bright-eyed but guarded. They weren't just her reason for staying grounded. They were her fuel, her why. And slowly, Dwayne changed too. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who didn't care about his title or status. But Grace didn't challenge him for the sake of ego. She did it because the work mattered. And that forced him to become a different kind of leader. 6 months later, their project, ConnectFear, was ready. It wasn't just another platform. It was a breakthrough, a lifeline for businesses and individuals to communicate faster, safer, smarter. But more than that, it was a product born out of resilience, out of late nights and long shifts, and the belief that brilliance didn't have to wear a suit. And when the launch finally happened, the world took notice. But Grace, she stayed the same, sharp, grounded, unshaken, because for her the app wasn't the finish line. It was only the beginning. Success used to mean numbers, market share, IPO spikes, acquisitions. That's how Dwayne Johnson had measured his life for decades. He had always believed in precision, in pedigree, in pulling the best from the most qualified. But working with Grace had begun to chip away at that belief, quietly, steadily, and then all at once. When ConnectFear launched, it didn't just make headlines, it made waves. The tech community buzzed with praise. Industry analysts called it a paradigm shift in secure communication. Reviews praised its speed, simplicity, and intuitive design. But what they didn't know was that much of what made it work came from the perspective of someone who had never set foot in a boardroom. Grace's fingerprints were on every feature, every line of logic. She'd built it to be useful, not flashy, human, not corporate. The launch was a win, but for Dwayne, it did more than boost numbers. It sparked reflection. For years, he'd surrounded himself with brilliance that looked a certain way. Now he saw how much he'd been missing by not looking deeper. Grace didn't just stop at the app. She used her rising platform to create something bigger, a scholarship fund for working-class students like her who had to leave school, not because they failed, but because life got in the way. She spoke at community colleges, sharing her story with students who felt invisible. She didn't posture. She didn't try to impress. She told the truth about the struggle, the late shifts, the nights spent Googling terms instead of sleeping, and that truth resonated. Meanwhile, Dwayne started rewriting the internal playbook at Johnson Innovations. Hiring policies shifted. He scrapped resume-first filters and started recruiting from unexpected places: community colleges, local coding boot camps, even neighborhood cafes. He started showing up to pitch competitions in places no other CEO bothered to visit. He wasn't doing it as charity. He was doing it because Grace had taught him something every billion-dollar boardroom had missed: that untapped talent wasn't scarce. It was simply overlooked. Internally, it wasn't always smooth. Some executives resisted. They questioned the changes, but Dwayne stood firm. He'd seen what happened when someone brilliant was finally given a shot. He wasn't going back to the old way. And as the company evolved, so did he. No longer just the untouchable CEO, he started showing up at development meetings, not to command, but to listen. He began mentoring, not preaching. It wasn't about proving he was the smartest person in the room anymore. It was about creating rooms where people like Grace could thrive. One night, months after the launch, he found himself back at Rosie's. This time not out of desperation, but choice. The place hadn't changed much. The linoleum still cracked underfoot. The neon still flickered. But to Dwayne, it felt different now. Warmer. Familiar. Grace was there too, not behind the counter, but seated at a booth, laughing with her brother and a small group of young developers she'd started mentoring. They were celebrating the latest update of ConnectFear, a big one. Dwayne walked over, coffee in hand, and raised his mug. "To underestimating people," he said with a slight grin. Grace clinked hers against his. "And to proving them wrong." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just two people sharing a moment in a diner that had seen everything. But something had shifted, not just for them, but for the world they were shaping together. And none of it would have happened if he hadn't. Let a waitress read his contract. Sometimes the person you overlook is the one who will save everything. Grace didn't just decode a contract. She decoded a man's pride, a company's future, and an entire culture of gatekeeping. She turned late-night coding sessions into a breakthrough that helped people connect and reminded us all that brilliance doesn't come from where you stand. It comes from how you think. If this story made you feel something, hope, love, outrage, don't scroll past. Hit the like button to show you're with the underdogs. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated? Or better yet, have you ever discovered greatness in someone no one else noticed? Share their name. Make them seen. And if you believe in stories that change lives, subscribe, because we've got more stories that'll make you cry, cheer, and rethink everything you thought you knew about success. This is just the beginning.